Welcome to Pharmacist Diaries, anyways. I haven't said that for so many weeks because I've had to kind of take a break over the Christmas period. So it feels good to be back in action in the new year, and Happy New Year, too.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me.
No worries. I guess we kind of kickstart most of the episodes asking you why you became a pharmacist in the first place.
I really wish I had a non-Asian cliche to give you, but sadly, I don't. My parents, my father in particular, was adamant that one of his children do something medical. And I have three elder sisters, and none of them did. And I had a younger brother who, at the time, was in a lot of trouble at school. And so dad was like, oh, I'd picked my A levels and I'd picked humanities. And he was like, oh, you did so much better in your science at GCSE than we expected, which I totally did. And he's like, oh, we wanted one of you to do something medical. And, my grandparents who lived with us had passed away. So his parents had passed away the year before. And he's like, your granddad really wanted you to do something medical. I felt so pushed into it. I was just like, I can't really say no now. I'm going to have to change my A levels to sciences. And I did. And so then when I was looking at what I wanted to do for a degree, pharmacy was one of those things that had called to me. One of my uncles owned a pharmacy, and I absolutely loved going to see him. I loved being in a pharmacy. I loved helping other people. I loved the fact that they got to interact with patients, and so that was a really key driver for me. I wanted to do something where I had patient contact, where I helped others, and I knew I never wanted to be a medic. It's a real calling, and it wasn't for me. So I knew that. So yeah, pharmacy for me was kind of like the option that gave me, and I didn't want to be a dentist. I was like, I don't want to spend my days looking in other people's mouths. That really didn't appeal to me at all. So I was like, well, okay, pharmacy sounds great, and it's sounds really interesting, exciting. I'd always loved chemistry, and I've always loved pharmacology, so that seemed to be a good fit.
Nice. I mean, a lot of people that I've interviewed, everyone says, I guess, that they became a pharmacist because they had an urge to help people when it came to their health in some form. Um, but a lot of people do say that they weren't really sure about pharmacy, or they didn't get into medicine, so it was kind of like their fallback option. Um, and in the Asian world, it's a lot of people know that our parents do encourage us to go for a medical profession. It's either medicine, pharmacy, or dentistry. And it's really common that people say those three professions because there are loads of other healthcare professionals out there, but
Yeah.
that's the top three that obviously um, Asian families and their children kind of aim for, in terms of what is, I don't know, maybe accepted in our society. I mean, things are different now, I think, but there is still an aspect of that with the society. I guess I have younger cousins who obviously have gone through university and recently had A levels, and definitely their parents are my parents' generation, but they're a lot younger. They are a lot younger. So their perception of what is accepted in society and what their children should do is actually a lot different to what I went through with my parents.
Oh, absolutely. And just listening to you talk there, I was like, well, my mum and dad didn't know anything else, right? That's the thing. I think, for that first generation who came over to this country, which was obviously my parents, excuse me, they, for them, they were the professions, weren't they? It was medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, law and accountancy, right? They were the other
Yeah.
two. And that was what was kind of drummed into us from a very young age. I don't think people even knew. My parents certainly didn't have a clue about physios, occupational therapists. They knew optoms, but again, it
Yeah,
wasn't really,
definitely. Yeah.
an optoms, and I know a lot of Asian optometrists, but yeah, it wasn't as pushed as much as you say. And I think now, as dare I say it, my generation, and certainly when I think about my cousins who are older than me, and they've got grown-up children now, they encourage their children in a completely different way because they're much more worldly. They went to university themselves over here. They've seen themselves what kind of careers their friends have gone on to do, and so I think the encouragement of their children is completely different to the encouragement certainly that I got.
Mm.
I don't know about you, Anisha. I know you're younger than me, but yeah, definitely I think there is going to be a step change because there's just more understanding, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got kids, right? So these sorts of things are starting to go through our minds in terms of how do you support the development and kind of passions of our children? Like, what do we do to support the things that they want to fall in love with or they show interest in? Um, and when I think about growing up, like my parents gave me everything. I was so lucky, like any kind of lesson or opportunity for music, languages, sports, kind of everything. I had access to it. But I think deep down, it's like you already knew that you had to go down the scientific route. So it didn't really matter if you joined, the singing club and the orchestra club and you were really good at piano. Like, it was a skill that was required to get that application. It
Mm.
wasn't necessarily um, something that felt like a passion or a skill that you're learning for fun. It
Mm.
always felt like there was a need to do it because everyone else at the school was doing it, and there was a lot of competition between parents and their children, and what children were doing. In my school, it was quite significant. And then as a teenager, like when I was 15, my parents moved to the US. So I moved from an all girls private school to a very different
Is it like a
mixed
US high school?
US high
Oh my
school, which
God.
is like the movie Clueless. So it was that, and that was really different because I
Mm.
didn't really fit in. I was completely an outsider. Everyone kind of grew up together in that town where I lived in Richmond, in Virginia.
Yeah.
They went to elementary school, middle school together. They went to high school, and I joined the second year of high school. Um, and everyone had formed their kind of cliques and like
Yeah.
their groups. And in terms of sports and things, it was really competitive. Like, you had to be good at being a cheerleader to even, join that club. You would have had to have done it in middle school in order to be good enough to even like try for tryouts, basically.
Yeah. I mean,
Um, and it
it's a
was just
different
so
level, isn't it?
different. It was
It's a
just
different
so
level.
different. But now, like, I'm encouraging Lily to do anything that she is passionate or interested in. And then with the hopes that, I mean, she's only 4, so there's not that much going on except swimming and
You just
gymnastics
wait.
right now.
You just wait.
But,
As they get
I
older.
kind of, yeah, no, obviously it's a game changer as they get older. And, but it's really exciting because I'm looking forward to seeing what her personality is going to grow
Mm.
into and kind of what she's passionate about. At the moment, she's adamant that she's going to become a pharmacist, adamant that she's going to work with me in the pharmacy. Um,
Oh, bless
we went
her.
to A&E for her chickenpox this week, and I was in the hospital with her, and I was like, we're in the hospital, and this is the kind of place that I work. Like, this is the type of ward I would work on. These are the type of patients that I would see. Like, I would
Yeah.
be walking around in this type of working with nurses. Like, you can see the doctors. And then I was like, do you still want to work with me? And then she actually just kind of sat there and was like, I'm not sure if I want to be here, but I still want to work with you. But I'm not
Oh,
sure that I want to work in a hospital.
that's
So yeah, it was
that's the
cute.
thing though, isn't it? Would you let her? That's the real question. If she came back to you and said, "Mummy, I want to be a pharmacist," and like got through her GCSEs and A levels and still wanted to do it, would you actively encourage her? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I don't know what pharmacy is going to be like
Mm.
20 odd years from now. Um, I'm really glad that there's so much variety in this profession, but I am also starting to see burnout to the extent where I'm not impressed, and I struggle to accept that we're in a profession, and it's not pharmacy per se. It's probably more the NHS and me working in a hospital, where I feel like pharmacy says yes to everything, and
Yes.
I don't know, it's hard to explain how I feel, because I can see myself falling into the burnout trap. I'm doing everything that I kind of need to for my health and wellness, for my mental health, but it's one thing on top of another, on top of another. And just as you kind of cross one hurdle, there's kind of 10 more that get piled onto your workload.
Hmm.
There's the expectation that if one colleague kind of leaves, a lot of their workload then falls onto your lap without a discussion. It's just kind of like expected that you're just going to take over
Yep.
all of that work, and there's not the opportunity to say no, or it's difficult to say no, or you feel like you're not a good enough employee if you do say no. So
Boom, that's it.
yeah.
That's the key. You've just said it. And this is the problem. Given that I suffered with burnout and I now work mainly with pharmacists who are also at the edge of point of burnout, that's exactly the problem. What you've just said there. We don't feel like a good employee if we complain or if we
Mm.
say no. And unfortunately, and I speak from first-hand experience, a lot of what we are experiencing is because of the way that we treat ourselves. That's part of the
Yeah, yeah.
problem. And it's that whole thing of we're people pleasers and we can't say no and we feel incredibly guilty all the time. And we over worry and we overthink. And when you add all of these things, and because I've been doing this for enough time now to notice that there are certain traits that we become predisposed to because of our work, that then leads us to suffer with burnout at a greater scale than even some of our other um, you know peers, our other healthcare professional peers. And it's because of that. And like you just said, we don't feel like we can say no. We don't feel that we can actively push back, and we're expected to take on the work of others, and there's no chance to even discuss it. And you just sort of think, this is the problem when you're in a profession where you've put the needs of others before your own, and you feel you can't say no ever. Of course you're going to get to a point where it just becomes too much, and this is where burnout occurs, or where people go off sick or leave their job because it just gets to the point where they cannot physically cope with the amount that they're being asked to do, or the amount that they're putting on themselves to do. And so, I hear a lot in the profession about we need to think about how to prevent burnout. And yes, there's absolutely huge external factors in terms of lack of resources, lack of funding, and the rest of it. But there are also internal self leadership type of things that we should be teaching. It's not even could, we should be empowering our pharmacists and technicians, all professionals within pharmacy. We should be empowering them to be able to push back, to be able to manage their workloads better, to be able to not beat themselves up as much as they do, and to be able to not feel as guilty as they do pretty much 100% of the time. And I think if we can do that, we'd see a lot less burnout, and we'd see a lot more. We'd in fact see a lot less pharmacists sticking out jobs where they are absolutely
No,
miserable and ill.
yeah. Or leaving a job that they genuinely love because they just can't cope with what they've been asked to do, and
Yeah.
it's not actually their fault. And then you feel like you failed when that's not really the case. I mean, it's very much accepted in the pharmacy world, in the hospital especially, and that's kind of where my experience is most of the time, is that we just accept everything that's kind of thrown at us. And because we have to accept that, the attitude is just get on with it. There's nothing else that we can do. This is what we've been asked to do by our execs. Deal with it. And it is really difficult to kind of bring that up in conversation, because you do feel like you're bothering the leadership when they have lots of other things going on. Um, you can get that sense of, not feeling good enough in your role when actually you're highlighting maybe it's a safety issue, because if you're overworked, overwhelmed, dealing with patients, like you could easily make an error.
Mm.
And with pediatrics, it's even more, you know, worrisome. Like, especially what I do with pediatric palliative care. We're using, high risk drugs, strange doses, everything's unlicensed, weird formulations. If you're like, recently I've been really sleep deprived, and going through some insomnia, and I just thought to myself, like, man, I'm really worried inside that I'm going to make a mistake because I'm not me at the moment. And how do I work on slowing down, and how do I work around the fact that I need to change the way that I work in order to support my patients and not
Mm.
make a mistake and have something really risky happen. So yeah, it's a huge topic of conversation, and I'm a huge advocate for thinking about our kind of health and wellness in the workplace and having more resilience, and also having the opportunity to speak up. And these conversations are happening more and more often on the podcast because I think so many more people than I ever expected are going through that situation.
Yeah.
So it's great, like, I've got this platform to discuss things. It's also great that people feel like they're not alone, because it does come up in conversation. But I feel like we need to take the next step in terms of advocating for better workplace environments, because there are places that are very enjoyable and you feel safe, you feel, like a sense of reward, you feel valued, and your health and well-being is prioritized. It can happen.
It does happen.
Yeah, it does happen. So it's kind of, finding that equality
Yeah.
within different organizations. I mean, I locumed in a community pharmacy a couple of months ago, and you know, I haven't locumed in a long time, in community, and I wanted to experience it, from a few different reasons. Just because I've been out of practice, but also because we send palliative care prescriptions to GPs, and there's been some errors in the community because
Yeah.
of the lack of understanding of our prescriptions. And I forgot that you don't get a lunch break. Like, you don't get a lunch break. Like, what is that?
You have 10 minutes to eat
Like,
your sandwich at the back of the dispensary
in
if you're
in
lucky.
yeah, and my husband was mortified. Like, he was mortified. He was just like, "What do you mean? Like, you just like eat and if a like what?" He couldn't even finish sentences because he was like, "How is that allowed?" I was like, to be honest, like, I remember when my parents owned a pharmacy, back in the 1980s, it was still the same. And how have things not changed? Why is no one speaking up about this? Is my question, because it's really worrying that these community pharmacists are just literally, worked off their feet. And plus, I had to obviously stand for a long shift while in the
Mm.
hospital. You do get the opportunity to sit down. We do have the luxury of, I do take a 1 hour lunch break, like most days of the week. It's very rare if I don't. I get out the hospital, I go for a walk, I get fresh air, I do all the things that I am meant to do to support my health and well-being, um, because I can. And it's, standard practice to take that hour. No one's expecting you to not do it. I know it's different, like with doctors and things, they don't get the same luxuries as we do. But again, they can. It's just finding a way to make it happen.
It comes
Um,
down to, Anisha, it comes down to leadership. You said a couple of things back when you were talking about, um, you know, in fact, the first thing you said that made me, and obviously I'm a leadership coach, so I always pick on the leadership, but you said something when you said, um, I would go to the leadership, but they have enough to do, and so I don't feel like I can. That right there is the most common misconception.
I know. It's
That's the
terrible, isn't it?
problem. It
I
is
know.
because leaders are there to lead their teams to manage the process. They are not there to manage the process. That's what managers do. Managers manage the process. Leaders lead the team to manage the process. We have far too many managers in our profession and we don't have enough leaders. That's the biggest problem that we
Mm,
have. And the leader is the person that sets the tone for the organization and for the team. And so, if you had, even in that community pharmacy, a leader who is insistent upon a lunch break, right? whether that means shutting. And there's many pharmacies where they will say the pharmacist is on lunch at the moment. If you need to pick up your prescription, you need to come back, or they will advertise it and say the pharmacist will be on lunch from 12:30 till 1 today, so we won't be able to serve you effectively at that time. Where does that come from? The leadership. If the leadership
Yeah.
decrees that that's what's going to happen in that particular branch, then that is what will happen. Now, whether it's a multiple or an independent or whatever it is by the by. Leadership is leadership. And so when you're saying, how is this still able to happen, why isn't this changing, it's because the leadership isn't changing it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I completely agree with you on that. I just find it's mind-boggling to
In
me
this day
that
and age, it is.
yeah,
And those leaders who prioritize their well-being and the well-being of their teams, they're the ones that have teams that never want to leave them. And
mm,
I've been in some of those teams, and I left not because I was leaving my manager. It's because actually I was moving up, and I was effectively, it was a promotion from my previous position, so it was more career development and advancement than it was leaving my last manager. But I have also left a couple of roles where I have left the manager. I was very fortunate to have two amazing managers very early on in my career, and unfortunately they set the bar so high that what I followed after that was two not so great leaders, and I really struggled with that because I'd had two leaders who lived to develop me, and that's what a good leader does. They develop their team effectively. You're effectively developing your team so that they will leave you. That's the whole point.
yeah, 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 yeah.
That's when you're doing a good job, because
Yeah, no,
you learn
you're
that you're
completely
putting that
right.
person first. And yeah, so it just, when you've kind of had that good leadership, and it's what actually pushes and drives me, is that I know the difference between having a good leader and a bad leader. And so if I can help some of the leaders in our profession to be better, to look after themselves better and to look after their teams better, that's got to be a better, that to me is a real demonstrable outcome, rather than giving pharmacists counselling services. And I'm not knocking that at all, because it has its place, but there just isn't enough on the prevention side. There just isn't enough looking at, why
Yeah,
is
I'm
this
with you.
even a problem? Why is this a problem, and what can we do to resolve it? And
Mm.
actually, should we be giving our leaders the skills that they need in order to develop their teams, and to be able to question, because they can, because they're in the position to question, just because something's been the status quo for 20, 30 years doesn't make it right.
Yeah, no, no, completely. Completely. And I guess, I've recently also kind of reminded myself to be the change. I use that
Yeah.
phrase a lot because, um, I come home and, complain to my husband or vent to him about some issue or something I'm frustrated about that I feel like I can't change. And, I've tried a variety of things and it just doesn't seem to open people's eyes to the issue at hand. Um, and he's always kind of feeds back, his favorite phrase is role model the way and be the change that you want to see,
Yeah.
and people will follow you. And I use that a lot now, and I remind myself of that on a very regular basis. I do that with
Good for
parenting.
you. Good for you.
Yeah, because it's really important, and I'd rather not get really frustrated that I can't change someone's perspective, or I can't change the way they think. And actually, when you think about it, that's not what we should be doing in the first place. I feel like role modeling the way, the same as I do as a parent, and demonstrating the good qualities that I want my child to also have as she grows up, whether it's, honesty or taking responsibility, or, looking at something negative and changing it to a positive. If I role model those things for her, she will see that that's normal, and she will see that that's something that she can do as well. And in the workplace, it's like sometimes with projects, we've used really kind of old school ways of working, whether it's making kind of lists on paper or using Excel sheets to kind of think about, what tasks we have to do for a project. And I'm like, no, 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 like there's project management apps that do this for us. Like,
Mhm.
let's get on board and make some change. And I finally got the funding now to put this like we've been using the free version, but we've got the funding now. We're actually going to implement this in the team, and it's taken like 2 years to get there, but it's working. I am being the change. I'm role modeling the way. I'm demonstrating that this works,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing some kind of positive change from that. So I guess it's also a little bit of perspective when you're in these situations. In terms of leadership, when I worked for National Ambulance, when I was in Abu Dhabi and I worked for the Formula One, um, the medical director was my line manager, and he knew nothing about pharmacy. Uh, he did want to learn, but he knew nothing about pharmacy. But it was really useful because he could see a lot of kind of leadership skill that I didn't have, a lot of
Mm.
project management skill that I didn't have. And he found all of my weaknesses, and he pushed me in the right direction
Yeah.
to improve who I was. And I changed significantly in that contract that I had with them. I became a very different person from a professional perspective, of going from a resident, very junior, early careers pharmacist into someone who was changing law for a country. Like, it was so amazing. And I can see why I have high expectations for leadership, because I've been part of an organization where someone has really supported me and helped me to grow. And of course, like, I do a lot of self development, and I expect a lot from myself and do what I need to do personally to become a better professional. But I also have an expectation that, I guess, my managers and my leader will also help me to identify where my weaknesses are, or where they think
Mm.
my skills should be directed. And sometimes in the NHS, I don't feel like that happens. I feel like, when you do your kind of professional kind of yearly review, it's just kind of a tick box exercise to some
I think
extent.
it is. I think you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And it's interesting you said that you think you have high expectations of leadership. And I smiled when you said that. And I said, are they high, or are they actually just normal, in inverted commas, whatever normal is?
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Because, but yet you think that they're high, probably because of what we have been exposed to. And there was a post that my good friend Kamal, I know you've had her on your show in the past. She'd mentioned somebody had put a post about leadership within the NHS, and Kamal had sort of talked about, we need to look at the way leadership is dealt with in the NHS. And I commented on that, and I actually had an overwhelming response from the comment that I made, which is, the problem is that within the NHS and within healthcare in general, we are taught how to be clinicians. Okay, we leave university having been taught how to be clinicians. We are not taught how to be leaders. We are not taught how to manage people. We are not taught how to lead people. We're not taught how to motivate and inspire. We are taught how to be the clinical lead. We're not taught how to be an operational lead. We're not taught how to run a business. We're not taught how to run a team. None of this is given to us, and we're not taught it. And I know that certain universities have done various, they do various different types of management type of modules, but not in the same way. We're taught to be the clinical lead, not the operational or the people lead. And until we get more focus on that within the NHS, we're going to continue to have this problem because, by our very nature, particularly within pharmacy, we're very detail focused.
Mm.
And so, if you're asking a pharmacy leader to not get involved in the detail, that's asking them to go against the very grain of who they are. And
Yeah.
so, it's very difficult for them to be able to remove themselves from the day to day and from the detail and from the focus, and actually, you know, be a leader in that they are there to support their team in so that their team can do the work. And
Yeah.
that very rarely happens. I've seen it happen. And when it does, these have been the most successful teams that I've ever worked in, because the
Mm.
manager understands their role, that I am the leader. I'm here to support and motivate my team so that they can deliver the work. It's not my job to get involved in the day to day. And those have been the most effective teams that I've worked in. And so until we shift that focus, and within pharmacy start to look at developing the softer skills of leadership, the self leadership. And it comes back to, I think until we do that, we're not going to see a change. And the other thing that you said as well, when I was thinking about what you were saying, and you said, be the change. Yes, it's about being the change for the team that you work in. Yes, it's about being the change for the fact that, you're a parent, and be the change for your children. But actually, a lot of things I get, and even from the healthcare assistants, they'll say, well, I'm not a leader. So why is this relevant for me? Right? Particularly when I'm talking about self-leadership. And I say to them, we're all a leader. We all have to motivate and inspire ourselves to get up in the morning and go to work and do a good job and be there for our patients, right? So every single one of us is a leader. Then you think about all the people that you influence. So it's not just even about being the change of people that you might work with or are responsible for, but actually every single patient that comes in, you are a leader to that patient. Whether you are a pharmacist, a tech, or a healthcare assistant, you are a leader to that patient. You are a leader to your siblings, your brothers, your sisters, your friends, your neighbors, and a leader to, as well as a leader to yourself. And so, actually, these are key things. When you're saying be the change for actually everybody, be the change for yourself, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's a good point to raise as well, because it's really important to think about that, when you're self reflecting. I also think that our leaders are also quite reactive in the NHS, and we're just always constantly fixing what's happening now, rather than preventing those things from happening, because there's just no time. But again, for me, I feel like saying there's no time is always an excuse, because it's comes down to what you prioritize or what you
Absolutely.
delegate, and kind of where your leadership lies, and also saying no to all the additional services that somehow get kind of fallen on our laps. And there's so much that just comes our way on a daily basis, and it's very easy to just be that yes person,
Mm.
instead of saying, well, actually, we've got these 10 issues within our team, and we're going to have to delay or say no, or you need to delegate that to someone else, until we fix what we've got going on, and we become more, I guess, preventative in terms of stopping all those day-to-day kind of
Yeah.
issues from arising.
Yeah, you know what's a really good way, a really good technique that I teach, and I train on when you're being lumbered with, and I was the same, right? I was that yes person up until fairly recently. So I completely understand when you've got that many things that you are being asked to do, and they're all a priority, and it's just like, I just don't know where this is ever going to end, and it's each day just merges into the other because you're just so exhausted. One thing you can, when you're being given something new to do and you already have a list of priorities, excuse me, and a list of tasks that you have been given, and they're all really, really important and urgent and everything else, is to push back to the person that's putting that additional pressure and to say, what would you have me prioritize? Okay, it's a really powerful sentence, because when you've already got this many priorities, so if you say, I've already got XYZ to do, you're now asking me to do this, and I understand that this is a priority. So you imagine, this is not, I'm not being contentious and I'm not being confrontational. It's all in the language. So I already have XYZ. You're now giving me this, and I totally understand that this is also important. But what would you have me prioritize? And then it's about partnering with your manager to come up with the things that and it makes them think, oh, actually, she's already got all this. So either they will say, you know what, this new service, don't worry about it, I'll get someone else to do it. Or they'll say, okay, I can see the list of things that you've currently got. Actually, this is more of a priority than this. So don't do that. Don't worry about that. And
Mm,
without saying no, because you haven't said no, all you've done is push back and clarify. But it's forcing them as the leader, because that's their job, to help you to figure out what it is that you should be focusing on. It's so powerful if you just use that. If nothing else, if you just take
yeah,
that one thing from this podcast and go back, and when someone's giving you additional work, to say, okay, and you might get, well, it's all a priority. They might come back and say, well, it's all a priority. Right, what would you have me prioritize? Well, it's all a priority. Okay, but I only have a finite amount of hours in the day, and I physically won't be able to do all of these things. So out of all of them, what would you say to me are the most important ones to focus on?
mm. Yeah, no, that's a great tip. I'm going to try that. I'm going to feed back to you. I'm going to feed back to you. Yeah, my
Please
chief
do.
listens to the podcast, so she'll be listening into what we're chatting about and laughing probably at the craziness that I always come up with. But um, sometimes I also think that you do need to kind of push back from that perspective, and have the confidence to do that, which can be quite hard sometimes.
Oh, it's completely
Um,
hard. It goes against who we are.
yeah,
Like I said, this is completely
yeah,
against the grain, just like it is for the managers to step away from the day to day. It's
yeah,
completely against the grain for us pharmacists to say no and to actually prioritize ourselves first, like, and
yeah,
not
yeah,
just
yeah.
do what people want us to do. We're people pleasers, right? So it's a really hard thing for us to do. Um, and when I cover this in training sessions, you can physically see the discomfort on the faces of these pharmacists, because it's like, I can't possibly say that to my manager. I'm like, why can't you say that? You can absolutely say that.
Yeah,
What's the
you
worst that
definitely can.
what's the worst
What's
that
the
can
worst?
happen?
Yeah,
What's the
yeah.
worst that can happen?
Nothing, nothing. I mean, literally, it's not a very difficult question to
No,
raise. And also, it helps sometimes your management really forget how much you've got going on. And it's a good
exactly.
reminder for them
Exactly. You're
as
helping them
to,
to do their job, because you're helping
yeah,
them to actually help, prioritize. And do you know what this is? It's all about perception. If you go into something thinking it's going to be a confrontation, it will be. Your language will come out. Your body language will suggest that this is a confrontation. If you go back and listen to how I phrased that, it was not confrontational at all. And it's all about the tone of voice that you use and the language that you use. And again, this is what I'm saying. These are the softer skills that we are not taught. We're not taught how to communicate effectively. We're taught how to communicate to patients and how to counsel patients. That's different. We did a module when I was at university, a communication module, which I absolutely loved. Um, and we were like, it was cutting edge at the time, because most universities weren't offering something like this, and you were videoed and you had to, it was all your counseling tips and stuff. So you were taught how to, you know, use like terminology that patients and things would understand. And it was more about that than it was actually thinking about not only the language you use to others, but the language you use to yourself, because
mm,
it's just as important, the tone and that and what you say. And so as I said, it's a perception thing. If you go into something thinking it's a confrontation, it will be. If you go into something thinking, actually, I'm just going to be a bit assertive, it doesn't have to be aggressive. There's a big difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness.
yeah, no, no, I agree completely. And it's funny because when I kind of reflect, I always think I'm not very assertive, and I probably am, but I just put myself down because I always think that there is an element of fear of asking for something because, or not even asking for something, but raising an issue or identifying a problem because you're afraid of being, I guess, not put down, but ignored to some extent, like even in meetings and things like that. I want to, because I'm really honest, I'm really open, I'm usually very upfront. Um, but sometimes I would say that I've already got the kind of preconception of what other people are going to feed back, and it's not what I want to hear, and it's not advocating for change, and it's not identifying that there is an issue, and it's kind of like we work around it a little bit and we have a chit chat and then nothing ever happens, or someone might agree with me but then it doesn't come up again, and it's always
Mm,
me who feels like every month we have our meetings and I'm raising the same problem over and over and we don't necessarily push forward with that issue. And I save myself the frustration of getting the feedback that I don't want to hear and not say anything. And then it makes me feel like I'm not assertive. I don't know if that makes sense, to be
I
honest.
think
I'm
so,
being
but
very honest tonight.
listen, honesty is always the best policy, so that's not a problem at all. I would say it's interesting that you've said that, in the way that you have. I think you are being assertive because you're asserting your opinion, right? And you're raising something. I understand. I can see what you're saying in terms of if you don't raise something and you feel like you're not being assertive. But again, I'd push it back to these. These again are key leadership skills, right? Firstly, when you're raising something, have a think and prepare in your mind for potential resistance and who it's going to come from, because you'll know. And if you've known the team long enough, you'll know where the resistance is going to come. If you can prepare for that resistance with a counter argument, that's always helpful. And then the second thing I would say is, who's your backer, who's your supporter, who can you leverage to bring the rest of the team on board? and you
Mm.
want to approach them before you even go into that meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just about pre-planning. You said, you said it yourself, we're too reactive. You're absolutely right, we are. So when you're going into something like that, when you're going to raise something, you need buy-in from others. You just have to be a bit more tactical and think about how can I bring other people on board. And so yeah, they're two kind of things that I would say. Think about that resistance and think about who can you bring on board in advance, who can then, and this is the best way to do it, is if you think about who your potential resistors are, and you look at that person and say, this is effective stakeholder management, by the way. So when you're um, think about who your potential resistors might be and say, okay, who's the person I can leverage to bring that person on board before you even raise this, before you even go into the meeting, right? So if you know, I'm totally making up a name here, right? Let's say it's a person called Joe, and you think Joe's going to be a resistor to this. So who can I leverage? Well, Joe's boss, I don't know, Sally, Joe's boss, Sally, she's the one that could probably bring them on board. So I'm going to have a chat with Sally about this issue and just see where her opinion is and see if I can bring her on board. And she's usually a backer of mine, so I get on really well with her. I've got good relationships. So I think I could probably sway her before we even go into this meeting. Boom, she's done the work for you.
Nice.
You don't even have to do anything because
Oh,
she'll
I've
do
got
it for you.
two things to try now.
Your chief
Team,
is going to be
watch
sitting
out.
there thinking,
Yeah. Watch out. I'm getting assertive. I'm starting to, you know, be opinionated. No, but it's good. Like, these are all things that we have to learn. And unfortunately, as pharmacists, these are things that aren't taught on a
no,
degree course.
because
They're not taught in
that's
a
what I mean.
job.
It's not clinical. We're taught to be
Mm.
clinical leads. We are not taught how to manage ourselves in a meeting like that. That's the
Yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah.
of, and that's, and I only know this from the training and coaching that I do of leaders, all over the world now, that actually these are such important skills that we should be learned. And I do feel that there's a big disservice that's being done.
No, I'm with you there. And I mean, now I work obviously for King's College London, and there's so many things that are popping up in my mind in terms of the curriculum that make me feel like, okay, well, I've been in this job for 11 years, and there's so many things that I haven't learned that I need to learn. And it's all good and well that we aim for personal development and we learn on the go, we learn from experience, we learn from others. But actually, the expectations on us as healthcare professionals are so high in the service. I mean, if you think about the pandemic, it's completely changed everything, and expectations are very different.
Hmm.
We drop everything for patient care now. We drop everything for when there's a rise in cases. You know, we've got to be resilient. We've got to cancel annual leave. We've got to do all these things where we look after others. And to some extent, we're not necessarily always looking after ourselves because of the situation we're unfortunately faced with. But from a university perspective, I think there is a responsibility as professionals, as professors, as academics to now start thinking about how to create a more resilient workforce and incorporating these very basic skills for 18-year-olds in terms of what they're actually going to face when they reach the real world,
Yeah.
because they go on placements for a week, 2 weeks. They have no idea. They don't even know that these skills are needed, to be fair on them. They literally go in there to experience patient care, to understand how to do a drug history, to communicate with a family, to, you know, look at the medications and check interactions and, dispense medicines, all the basics. I get it. But they have no idea what reality is when they become a pre-registration pharmacist and
Hmm.
then enter into the real world. And there are so many young pharmacists out there who burn out within 3 years, and they're like, screw this. Like, this is not what I signed up for, and I don't like pharmacy. And it's not that they don't like pharmacy, they're just not prepared for what reality is. And I just think, from my perspective as an academic now, that I need to raise this as something that we really need to advocate for, because we need to look after the future generation of pharmacists going into healthcare. Is my perspective.
I agree. I completely agree. I do a session on burnout within pharmacy. Excuse me. excuse me. Yeah, I do a session on burnout, and I talk about this very same thing. I talk about the fact that we leave university and our pre-reg thinking that we're going to go out and like literally change the clinical outcomes of like millions of patients. And I'm not saying that we don't, but the reality of what the job actually is versus the fantasy that we have when we leave university and leave pre-reg is miles apart.
Mm,
And when we think about what burnout actually is, yes, burnout is a consequence of long-term stress, but it's about when you're effectively forcing yourself to do something that's not aligned with who you really are, and it leaves you with a feeling of emptiness. And so imagine if you think this job is a particular way, and then you start doing it and realize that it's so much worse than you ever thought. It's so much harder than you ever thought. And it's not aligned with anything, any notion that you had. Is it any wonder that after 3 years people say, yeah, that's enough, I can't do this, because it's just not what I thought it was going to be. That's why burnout happens. Yes, it's the long-term stress and the not being able to say no, and the people pleasing and taking far too much on, but it's also the fact that actually the reality has not met my expectation at all, and I physically cannot deal with what that means. We're naturally risk averse as pharmacists by the very nature of what we do. And so that's huge for us as a community of people. And I think, again, these are the types of issues that we should be addressing within our profession. But nobody wants to touch that because it's far too difficult. And I will say, I have spoken to national organisations about this very issue and said there's a lot of things that we can do around prevention, and there's just no interest. It's all lip service. They'll say that they're doing stuff around prevention. They're not, because it's complex, and it means working with people and getting them to become better leaders of themselves and of others, and to prioritize well-being and make it a mainstay of every team, because it absolutely should be. Every team should have a well-being lead. Every team, every department. They don't, but they should. um, and these are these simple things that we could be doing, but it's just, on top of all the other things that we've got, it's just not a priority at the moment.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I guess from your personal perspective, I mean, we've been chatting and I'm loving this conversation and there's so many interesting things coming up. So, I mean, usually we talk in depth about your career, but whenever these natural kind of enjoyable conversations happen, I just let them be, because that's what this podcast is about. It's about winging it and enjoying it. And um, like I said, it's the first podcast of 2022, and I just wanted to enjoy a conversation with a healthcare professional. Um, so I'm not like fully focused on learning all about your career, but from your perspective, because you're obviously a very experienced pharmacist, can you kind of explain in terms of your career journey where you started, I guess, realizing that burnout was an issue for you and what kind of advocated for the change that you've made? And following on from that, I guess, explaining where you are now in terms of what you're doing, because you're not directly working as a pharmacist now.
Yeah, great questions. Where I realized burnout was an issue for me is because, like many pharmacists, I worked my absolute butt off. Can I say that? I started off in hospital. I moved over to community fairly quickly. I turned my first store around where I worked, and then actually started working in implementation. So I was opening new stores. I was project managing from an operations point of view, kind of new store openings and acquisitions. Loved project management, and went into there kind of working with primary care, having never worked with primary care in my life. There's a few times I've done this in my career where I've just completely switched with no experience and just gone and done something different. And I then worked within primary care for a software company, and realized I really loved project management, realized I really loved data and analytics, and then went into a senior national role after that, again with very little experience. Um, and all the way through, I realized, and this was only a recent thing when I was really thinking about how what kind of my inner workings and my inner mechanics, is that my belief was that by working hard, you can accomplish anything. And so I worked harder, I worked longer, and I always delivered. I exceeded expectations. I did well in all of my end of year reviews. If there was ever any bonus or anything like that going, I'd get it, because I outworked everybody else. And where does that lead to? Because when you then move to a role that isn't aligned with who you are, and it's not really what you want to do, and you're not really given much support, and you're working ridiculous hours, and you suddenly realize, no matter how long or how hard I work, actually in this particular organization, I'm just never going to be acknowledged. That was a real blow for me. And I continued working at the level that I was. I pushed and pushed, and it was just never going to be good enough, sadly. And that was when it hit home for me. That was when the burnout happened, because I, wasn't sleeping. I was working ridiculous hours. I was constantly stressed. And I looked around, and so were my colleagues. And so I just thought, well, this is normal, isn't it? So I carried on. But no, it's not normal. And that, we should not be wearing our overwork as some sort of badge of pride, because it's not something to be proud of. The number of hours that we're working, the number of sleep, the hours that we don't sleep, we wear it as a badge of pride. Well, I only got 4 hours sleep. Oh, good for you. That's not a good thing. But that's what we did. That's what I did. And when I realized, I sadly didn't acknowledge my stress for a number of years. So it became burnout. I didn't acknowledge my burnout. And so it then became depression. And, things got quite bad for me before I realized, my God, I'm really not okay here. And I think I need help. Um, I now talk about this story quite openly, but, I just don't want anyone else to ever get to the place that I got to, because I really didn't need to. If I'd just been a bit more open and honest with myself first and foremost, if I could have admitted what was happening. But that whole experience, and I left that role and I took up another role, and that role was much better. I was much more aligned with who I was, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the people that I was working with. But it still wasn't right for me, and I knew it wasn't right. And by that point, I'd start to put things in motion for changing my career, still within pharmacy, because I wanted to give back to the profession that had given given me so much. I then, went and retrained as a coach, and it's because it was a coach that helped me get through my depression, not a counselor. I tried a counselor, it didn't work for me. I tried a CBT, a therapist, and that also didn't work for me. It was a mindset coach who got me to understand that so much of what I was going through was as a result of my own crooked thinking, my own negative thinking, a lot of which came about because of my job as a pharmacist, and what traits that had led me to pick up, what personality traits that had led me to pick up. So when I realized that, I just thought, oh my God, there's a whole population of pharmacists out there, some of them who I know are probably going through what I was going through, who think that there's no other way out, who think that they're trapped in the job that they're in, and what else would they do? And they where else would I get a job like this? And so they stick things out so much longer than they should. And I just thought, I've got to help these people, because I never want anyone to end up feeling suicidal like I did. Never. Not over a job. It's just not worth it. Life is too short, and we shouldn't be pushing ourselves to that point. And so that really is the driving force behind setting up the Mental Wealth Academy, and now really focusing on coaching and training around self-leadership in particular, and also, mental well-being. And that's kind of what I do now. And I coach and train all over the world, predominantly within pharmacy still, around, hey, listen, all this stuff that you're going through, some of this you really don't need to be, because it's just about being kinder to yourself. It's just about understanding that you have to motivate and inspire yourself every day, and that by beating yourself up and treating yourself badly really is not going to get the best out of you or the people around you. And that's the first step, is understanding that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel a lot of people don't have kind of self-awareness when it comes to how they feel, and they think that everything around them is normal. You know, the environment that they're exposed to is normal and this is how life is. And again, like, you accept that, okay, well, this is the NHS and this is hospital pharmacy and this is what I'm expected to do. So you just kind of get on with it. But in reality, like, I have a lot of self-awareness and I'm trying really hard now to look and reflect, write in my diary and really truly understand like what my values are. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast because I think
Mhm.
it's really important to understand exactly what you want out of life, out of your career, out of being a parent, whatever it is that you want to achieve, and then having sort of smaller goals and longer term goals in terms of achieving what it is that you're looking for. And I try to remind myself of these values on a regular basis, whether it's my daily journaling or pop-up reminders that come on my phone. And I kind of set myself, and I've talked about this before, it's like 3 kind of key words that I live by. And if I'm falling outside of that kind of zone, I need to find a way back in. And of course, we all have ups and downs, and we all kind of like get into kind of the trap of working really hard, and you've got some big deadlines, or with the pandemic we're having highs and lows in terms of the amount of work we're doing. But if you have those kind of true values and you really understand what it is that you want, you can always find a way back to where you started. And you always know when things are kind of shifting in the wrong direction. And that daily reflection is also really important, because if you start thinking negatively, or you're getting frustrated or emotional or tired, you see it on a daily basis or a weekly basis. You do a review, monthly basis you do a review, like the journals that I've bought. You kind of are doing a daily 5-minute reflection, but then on a weekly basis you look back and you're expected to actually check, not like how many good days you have, but you kind of score yourself on the different elements of your life that have a lot of value to you. And I've noticed some significant changes. And then I've actually looked back and thought, okay, well, I slept really well this week, so I can see why I'm a lot happier,
Mhm.
or I'm a lot more productive. I really focused on my nutrition this week, and I really ate really well, so I can see that my energy levels were much higher and I felt a lot happier, and energetic at work, and I could see that I was more positive in the way that I was thinking. And again, these are all things that we don't get taught, and I spend so much time in what limited spare time that I have learning and trying to find ways to always kind of improve what I'm doing.
That's
And
amazing.
it is a work in progress, thanks. And my husband's actually does it all with me as well. Like, we're kind of on the same page. And we've taken some courses together and had some coaching together, and it's kind of like combining your professional and your personal goals. So even, things like, we focus a lot on parenting. So like, we work together, and it's really nice to kind of come home and share that experience together, because if you are having a bad day or a bad few weeks, like I've had a really rough few weeks with this insomnia, but I've also had a lot of more self-compassion, and really had to convince myself, like, stop, slow down. It's okay to take, a break, or not have to go to work or take sick leave, because I never take sick leave. And
Which
then I had
pharmacist ever
so
does?
much. Yeah, I had like 2 weeks off sick leave from and the GP was just like, I want to sign you off for the rest of the year. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Um, and the sleep really, I was like, at one point with the sleep, I was so deprived. Words were coming out of my mouth. I was calling my daughter like Lucy instead of Lily. Like, words were just coming out wrong. And then realizing also that it was massively impacting like my diet as well. Like, I was choosing like a lot more kind of like starchy
Sugary, carbohydrate, yeah, yeah.
carbohydrate foods. I didn't have that much sugar actually, thankfully, but it was a lot of starchy carbs. And I thank God I'm aware, because I could see all of these things happening, and I was able to kind of bring myself back, and making small changes, whether it's ensuring I have one smoothie a day
Yeah.
or stocking up the fridge
See,
with as much fruit and veg as possible.
that right there, what you've just said there, is the key, right? Small changes, just small incremental changes. We think it
Yeah,
has to be
definitely.
something big. It
No,
doesn't.
no, no, no.
It really doesn't. And when I said that's amazing, I genuinely meant it. You are an anomaly. You are an outlier. And if I could clone you 60,000 times over, and we had honestly, we had a population of pharmacists who are self-aware, who self-inquire, who prioritize their well-being, my God, would we be in a
I know.
better place?
Tell me about it. This is why I get really frustrated, because I see how much work I'm putting in, and I do see the benefits. I do see the outcome. There are ups and downs, and I'm not perfect. It's a work in progress. And again, I have to have self-compassion that I'm not able to achieve the best level of health and well-being all the time, but who can? But the main thing that I am trying is much smaller habits.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was used to doing like 90 minutes of Ashtanga yoga daily, 6 days a week, minimum, even pregnant with Lily. And it was just part of my routine. Like, there was no ifs and buts about it. There were weekends where my husband would be watching Arsenal, like, and I would just be doing yoga in the background. And I've already done 90 minutes in the morning, but I just loved it that much. And life has completely changed, obviously, becoming a parent. My priorities are different. My time is spent differently. I don't have as much time. So I was so annoyed with myself that I thought I had lost my passion for something that I enjoyed a lot. But it wasn't a loss of passion. It was just a misunderstanding of what my priorities were, and being angry with myself unnecessarily and feeling guilty for not doing it. And I'm a very much all or nothing person, and I talk about this a lot, and I'm really trying to change. And I just think now, like, doing 10 minutes of yoga or sitting on my yoga mat and actually not doing anything, and having that self-compassion that it's okay. Like, I brought myself to the mat. I've been mindful. I've tried to move or stretch or do something for myself. And it's not 90 minutes, and it's not power yoga, and it's not,
But it doesn't
exerting
matter.
sweat, but it doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, but
That's the key, isn't it? When you say
it
to
takes
yourself,
so much time to accept that, though.
it does.
It's
It's the
taken a lot
self-compassion
of
piece.
work.
That's what I was
Yeah, it
saying. The
takes a lot
fact
of
that you
work.
say to yourself, but it's okay, right?
Mm.
Again, if there's one thing that you can take from this podcast, you just take those 3 words, but it's okay. And if you add that to everything you ever say to yourself, you will feel a million times better. I
Yeah,
promise you that,
yeah.
because most pharmacists listening to this will say, oh, I didn't do that. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, I didn't do that very well. Oh, I failed at this. Oh, I'm not good at that. Or I can't do this. But that's okay, right? Excuse yourself. Just
Yeah,
forgive
yeah, yeah.
yourself. But that's
Agreed.
okay. It's okay. You imagine if you just added that to everything, how that would instantly change the way you feel. Because I do this with my coaching clients, right? The pharmacists I work with, and I'll say to them, like, tell me all the bad stuff you say to yourself, the stuff that you would never utter in front of another human being, right? And it'll be things like, oh, you're fat, or you're ugly, or you're useless, or you're no good at your job. All this stuff that we secretly say to ourselves, that we would never, ever tell anyone else that we're saying to ourselves, right? And if you write all of that down, and then what I do is, as they're telling me, I write it down, and then I repeat it back to them. And I say to them, if I was a member of your team and you said all of that to me, how motivated do you think I would be day to day? And they were like, well, you wouldn't. I would never say that to you as a member of my team. Right. So why do you say it to yourself and expect you to be able to motivate and inspire yourself to get up every day and to do a good job and to be a good parent and to be a good wife or a husband or a sister or a daughter or whatever it is that you are, right? How can you expect that? You wouldn't utter it to another human being, but you'll say it to yourself every day.
Oh, yeah. I'm with you there. My husband is a very useful reminder of when I say ridiculous things. And he's like, please, would you say that to one of your patients? And then I'm like, oh, no, I wouldn't.
Exactly. Language
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah.
What you
No,
say to
language
yourself
is
really,
massively
really
important.
matters. and you think it doesn't because nobody can hear you and you think it's secret. But you imagine that running in your subconscious, and it's 95% of our thought is subconscious, right? And if you're old enough like me to remember cassette players, think about what cassette is running in your head 95% of the time. And if it's, I'm no good at this, I can't do this, I don't deserve to be here, or, I should have done this, I could have done that, then there's no wonder that you won't be in a good place if that's what's running as the tape in your head 95% of the
Agreed.
time.
Let me ask you, if you were to kind of go back in time to when you graduated as a pharmacist and completed your pre-reg year, what advice would you give yourself now if you had to go back?
Work to live, don't live to work.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We're agreeing on so many
We
things.
are. We
I
are. And
love
that's
it.
what the other thing I would have said is be okay with good enough, right? We're all perfectionists as pharmacists. It's the nature of our job because we check the accuracy of everyone else. Therefore, everything we have to do, everything we do has to be accurate, has to be perfect. This is why a lot of us struggle with perfectionism and procrastination because, of course, if everything has to be perfect, you'll put it off doing it because it's going to take you ages. So these are, like, again, a couple of the traits that we pick up in our profession. And I think if I had known then, Harpreet, just be okay with good enough.
Yeah.
Don't keep striving for perfection. It's progress, not perfection. My God, the amount of hours and heartache I would have saved myself over the years. And I say that to anyone listening now. If you struggle with perfectionism and you struggle with procrastination, which is a side effect of perfectionism, be okay with good enough. It's not a reflection of who you are, okay? Because we're not super women and supermen. We're not. We're human. And, we are allowed to be less than superheroes, even though I know in the jobs that you do, you are every day, but you know what I mean? We can't do everything. It's just physically impossible. And it's okay not to be able to do everything.
Nice. And I guess I usually always ask, like, what people, I guess I ask people to look into the future and where you think you might be in 10 years' time. Any thoughts on that?
I know where I'd like to be in 10 years' time. And as a coach, I should say, this is where I'm going to be, and actually, believe that it's going to happen. No, I do believe that it's going to happen. I'm currently working on a leadership program for pharmacists, all the stuff that I've talked about today, because it's missing. And so for me, where I will be in 10 years, I'd like to be the sort of go-to authority for leadership within pharmacy, me and a few other key individuals that I'm working with, as experts on leadership in pharmacy. The go-to authority for leadership training, coaching, and, God willing, a retreat centre for pharmacists who want to
Love
go
that.
away and work on themselves on all the things that you've just said about personal
Love that.
development, because it's missing and we
Oh,
need it.
yeah, that's perfect. I love it. And can you give details of where everybody can find you on social media, like your website, things like
Of
that?
course, yes. So I'm predominantly on LinkedIn under Harpreet Chana, and I have a website. So it's www.thementalwealthacademy.com. It's a bit of a mouthful. Thementalwealthacademy.com. You can get me on there on email. On LinkedIn, you've got my email and my phone number as well if you want to catch me on there. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, there's many, and Twitter as well, actually, Harpreet K Chana on Twitter. So I'm on all the usual social media outlets. You can come and find me, and please contact me. I am so interested in hearing from, I speak to pharmacists every single day, and I offer a free 30-minute coaching call to any pharmacist. And most of the time, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you just need someone to speak to for 30 minutes to tell you that, no, you're not going crazy, and that actually everything you're feeling is perfectly normal. And, to come up with a bit of a plan of action of how you can help yourself. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's
get in
amazing.
touch.
That's amazing. I love it. And I'm grateful that pharmacists have something like this, accessible to them now. So it's amazing that you kind of transitioned from a pharmacy specific role into advocating for better kind of mental health and wellness for our
Yeah.
profession. So happy days. Well, thanks for your time tonight. Happy New Year again. And yeah, I really appreciate the conversation. I'm so glad that we just enjoyed, chatting rather than focusing on careers as we normally would. And yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. I loved the
Yeah.
conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much, Anisha, for inviting me to speak on the podcast. Happy New Year to everyone who's listening. Would love to continue the conversation. I wasn't expecting to talk so much about leadership, but it's just become that way. It's my passion. So, particularly as you've probably heard within pharmacy and healthcare. So yeah, listen, let's continue that conversation. Absolutely loved it. And yeah, hopefully I'll speak to you again soon sometime.
Yeah, definitely.